reinforce
okay.
Just
we have only 2 minutes.
Yes, just one second to
okay.
say. See, it underlines this issue of treating people with impunity, dehumanizing them out of greed, and above one needs, people want to exploit the circumstances because of their opportunities, to have control. And that ties in with what he has, unless, of course, we have a general orientation.
Reorientation.
And
everybody.
General faith in not treating people with this impunity, dehumanize them so that they have such high value for your office, then you condescend. You feel you are condescending, to give them what is due to them. And it's all the drive from greed and seeking personal advantage and insider trading and for benefit.
Well, thank you very much. I think we are coming back to what we started with. The people produce government.
Yes.
And governments are meant for governance, without really taking the sovereignty of the people, so to speak.
Yes.
Well, thank you for honoring our invitation, General. And Doctor, thank you. Well, you people, you're always here. Thank you very much.
It's our pleasure.
Speaking for Nigeria and for the good of the country.
Thank you.
But that has been the discussion, actually. And what we perhaps got from all the discussion is that all hands are to be on deck. What are the three institutions of democracy, or the people themselves? Nobody in authority should take advantage of his position, and no individual should take advantage of his private position. It is with collective responsibility that perhaps Nigeria's future is guaranteed. Thank you for watching. I am Aliyu Baba Baro. Goodbye.
Imagine a station where you access information. Think of a station that creates awareness for national development. Imagine a station that prepares you for a bright and greater future. A station for all ages. Documentaries, classroom and television, events coverage, children's programs and variety shows. Always stay tuned to NTA Knowledge on the StarTimes platform. Channel 359. For partnership, sponsorship and advert placements, contact us on NTA Knowledge. NTA Knowledge, learning to broaden horizon.
The West African Currency Board was responsible for issuing currency notes in Nigeria from 1912 to 1959. Prior to its establishment, Nigeria had used various forms of money, including cowries and manillas.
Here we have trade beads brought in by the Europeans when they first came to our shores to trade. And that's the original gin bottle, also used in exchange of slaves. By the time the central bank was fully in operations, on 1st of July 1959, we started issuing the Nigerian pounds. As you can see, they all have different colors, shapes, and sizes. Further down, we have the 1968 currencies, which were printed in the Biafran region during the Civil War.
On 1st July 1959, the Central Bank of Nigeria issued the Nigerian currency notes and coins, while the West African Currency Board notes and coins were withdrawn. It was not until 1st July 1962 that legal tender status was changed to reflect the country's new status having gained independence. In 1967, the Nigerian pound note was introduced. It could buy 500 cups of garri. The notes were again changed in 1968 as a war strategy following the misuse of the country's currency notes. The change that took place in January 1973 was a major one, and this involved both currency notes and coins. The 20 naira banknote became the first currency note in Nigeria. On July 1979, new currency notes of 3 denominations, 1 naira, 5 naira, and 10 naira, were introduced.
Governors appeal to Nigerians to cooperate with the Buhari administration as it works to create a better Nigeria.
Chief Justice of Nigeria says judiciary can deal with its problems as he unveils new judicial policy.
Minister of Transportation says the federal government is committed to improving the sector to diversify the nation's economy.
And on Good Morning Nigeria today, we focus on the role of the legislature in the fight against corruption.
This is 2016, but let's backtrack a bit to about 16 years ago, and I'm talking about the year 2000. This was when Nigeria hit the media headlines around the world as being the second most corrupt country of the world, courtesy a German-based Transparency International, a non-governmental organization that has been established to tackle corruption.
Well, that talk about corruption in Nigeria had actually been an issue of public discourse for many years, even before the publication of the report you talked about by Transparency International. Now, certainly those behind the first military coup in Nigeria in 1966 had blamed corruption as one of the reasons for their action. Now, again, when the administration of General Yakubu Gowon was overthrown in 1975, one of the reasons given by the coup plotters at the time for their action was also corruption. And to tackle the menace of corruption, the military government that took over, that's the Murtala Mohammed and Obasanjo administration, had in 1977 what was referred to as the Jaji Declaration.
You're absolutely right, Kingsley. And the Shehu Shagari civilian administration, which succeeded the Obasanjo military regime, continued the war against corruption by launching an ethical revolution. After 4 years in power, the Shagari administration was overthrown by the military, and the major reason the coupists gave for their action was also corruption.
Well, at the time, the administration headed by Major General Muhammadu Buhari came up with the war against indiscipline, known as Y. And of course, there were trials of politicians of the Second Republic who had lost power. And a number of them bagged long prison sentences for corruption and also lost property. But there was soon a palace coup in August 1985, then the General Ibrahim Babangida regime came on board, and it also on its own launched a national orientation movement, and later what was known as MAMSA, that's the Mass Mobilization for Social Justice.
The Ernest Shonuko interim administration that took over after General Babangida stepped aside had barely settled down before it was sacked by the Sani Abacha regime, who launched a war against indiscipline and corruption. After the Abacha passed on and General Abubakar came on board, he midwifed the transition to the present republic, leaving the corruption war for the civilian, of course, administration, which was led by Olusegun, Obasanjo, to take up.
Well, Chief Obasanjo, who had been a founder member of Transparency International, that's the agency based in Germany, within 6 weeks of taking office in 1999, signaled his resolve to tackle corruption by signing a bill for the creation of the ICPC, that's the Independent Corrupt Practices and Offences Commission. He sent a bill to the National Assembly. There was stiff opposition to the measure, and it took a Supreme Court ruling on the 7th of June 2002 for the ICPC to remain. And the National Assembly, however, played its part, and since then has passed other pieces of legislation, including that on the Economic and Financial Crimes Commission, EFCC, all in a bid to fight corruption, including, of course, we must mention at this stage, various pieces of legislation on money laundering.
Of course, definitely. And with the National Assembly, with the powers of oversight, maybe much more should come from the legislature. This is because research has shown that about the major corrupt issues the National Assembly tried to look into but did not bring closure to it. Amongst them are the MENA pension matters, the kerosene subsidy issue, the police pension problem, the Malibu oil deal, and of course the Farouk Lawan issue. On that note, I welcome you to another fresh edition of Good Morning Nigeria. Today, I'm Rhoda Obu.
Well, that's Rhoda. Thanks a lot for welcoming our viewers. My name is Kingsley Osadola. We have a number of questions, of course, to raise with regard to the role of the legislature in the fight against corruption. Now, this is corruption we're discussing squarely in the public space. Yeah. We also know that there is corruption in the private sector, as we saw about 8 years ago following the collapse of the Nigerian stock market and the various issues pertaining to abuses by corporation managers. A number of them banks, of course.
The pension scam is one that, you know, people are waiting to see what would happen in that area, especially in the areas of pension.
That's right, but pension is in the public space. What I'm just referring to now has to do with corruption also in the private sector. But essentially our focus will be on dealing with corruption in the public space and the role of the legislature in this matter. In addition to that main item for conversation, of course, we shall also have our regular companion segments, including newspaper review, business, and others. In the meantime, we're going over now to the newsroom, and our guide this morning is Laure Bala Hassan. Hi, Laure.
Hi, Kingsley. Good morning, and welcome to the news. The All Progressives Governors Forum has appealed to Nigerians to show more understanding, support and cooperation as the Buhari administration strives towards meeting genuine national aspirations for a better and prosperous Nigeria. Chairman of the forum, Governor Rochas Okorocha of Imo State, made the appeal while briefing newsmen after a closed-door meeting between President Muhammadu Buhari and members of the forum. While restating their resolve to support the president in the implementation of the Change Nigeria project, the governor assured Nigerians that their suffering will soon be over.
Nigerians should bear with us as a government. This was not a problem brought by APC government. It's been a problem that has existed long before APC come to government. We're only trying to clear the mess of the past. But we must take responsibility, and we must never shift the responsibility to anybody. That is APC. We are responsible. For everything happening in Nigeria, we are responsible. The good, the bad, the ugly. But we're promising Nigerians that we shall fix it.
The APC governors also used the forum to congratulate the president for the bumper harvest being witnessed this year, as well as the release of the 21 abducted Chibok school girls.
Action taken to bring back these girls. Let the same action be repeated so that the rest of the girls can come back. This will help, because that is a very big achievement in the life history of this government. And again, we came to report to Mr. President that his agricultural policy and program is yielding results. This time around, we have bumper harvests in most part of the country, in rice production and other things. So that policy should be sustained. And the funding policy from CBN, like anchor borrowers, should be encouraged because it's yielding results. And we're sure that in the next couple of years, a year, 2 years to come now, Nigeria will be self-sufficient in agriculture and may not need to import any more food products into this country. That was a great achievement.
And Vice President Yemi Osinbajo says the federal government is promoting workable policies in critical sectors to actualize diversification for development. Lekon Agbonde reports that it was at the commencement of the meeting of the National Council on Industry, Trade and Investment in Abeokuta.
We're working very closely with the central bank to try and improve liquidity in that whole value chain, just so that we're able to ensure that it remains a viable business and more investments, private investments can come into the sector. We must use what we produce. We must eat what we produce. And that is part of what will help us to get out of recession, to move us forward in our development and to, in fact, get us on the path of accelerated growth.
Meanwhile, Vice President Yemi Osinbajo says the Buhari administration would continue to actively pursue massive manufacturing and production of goods locally, stressing that the federal government will ally with investors who can facilitate the plan. The Vice President was speaking at a meeting with a local motor manufacturing company and Chinese investors. Deputy Senate President Ike Ekweremadu has called for parliamentary partnership between Nigeria and the United States through staff development and exchange program. Waziri Zayyanu reports that the Deputy Senate President was speaking when he received representatives of the U.S. National Democratic Institute in Abuja.
For us in the parliament, we have a great need for partnership with so many parliament and parliamentary organizations, because ours is just a nascent democracy.
And to the judiciary, the Chief Justice of Nigeria, Justice Mahmood Mohammed, has given assurance of the ability of the nation's judiciary to deal with all its problems as provided in the Constitution. Correspondent Femi Okeowo reports that the Chief Justice of Nigeria was speaking at the unveiling of a national judiciary policy in Abuja.
We could not ignore the fact that today we are faced with misguided impression as to the operation of our judiciary, while its more laudable qualities and achievements are akin to some fellow Nigerians. This is why the National Judicial Policy contains clear provisions restating the judiciary's commitment to transparency and accountability.
Meanwhile, Forum of Non-Governmental Organizations want judges and justices involved in the recent corruption allegation to step down from office until they clear themselves. Joseph Orok reports that at a press conference, the forum noted that even though the arrested justices and judges have not been declared guilty, their images appear to be tainted in the eye of the public.
And we call on all our citizens not to allow themselves to be misled by those who have constituted themselves into a stubborn bloc against this war. We urge the federal government to continue to take the lead in the prosecution of the battle against corruption in the judiciary in particular, and the corruption in the polity in general.
Minister of Transportation Chibuike Amechi says the federal government remains committed to improving the infrastructure in the transportation sector to diversify the nation's economy. He stated this at an international transportation conference in Abuja.
We have agreed to revive the old rail line, which is about 3,500 kilometers. We'll revive it. We are going to lead to industries.
And talking health, Nigeria has joined the global community in commemorating the 2016 World Polio Day. Correspondent Murjanatu Adam Saeed reports that effective surveillance as well as sufficient financial and technical support from government and donor agencies are said to be key in keeping the tempo in the fight against polio virus in Nigeria, especially in the northeastern parts of the country. She said this at a press conference by the National Primary Healthcare Development Agency.
So it's not just Nigerians, but it is the region. A testimony to the sound leadership of the President sure that all resources are released properly and that we continue to look for additional resources and enable us to mount what's responsible. We are working together.
Director General, Nigerian Television Authority, Yakubu Ibn Muhammad, has promised to give the National Commission for Refugees, Migrants and Internally Displaced Persons all necessary support to actualize its mandate of returning displaced persons to their respective homes. This was during a visit to synergize between the two agencies.
We are doing some special reports and highlighting the plight of these people, because it is the business of all Nigerians to ensure that these people return as soon as they can to their original places of abode.
We are here to discharge our duties diligently and live up to the expectations of Nigerians.
And that's the news for now. Good Morning Nigeria continues with Rhoda and Kingsley shortly after the break. Good morning.
If you hear a bomb explosion or gunshots of an active shooter, that might be a terror attack. At such times, always remember 3 action words: run, hide, report. Don't try to run towards the terror scene to save the situation, because there might be a second bomb blast or another attack. Run far away and take cover. Make sure you are safe first. Yes, it is in our nature to sympathize over the hurt, but remember, only trained personnel can help in such situations. When in a secured environment, promptly call relevant authorities and help will come. For anonymous reporting, call 09630-3250-5 or 0813-2222-106. If you see something, say something. Nigeria unite against terrorism. This message is brought to you by the Federal Ministry of Information and Culture.
In life, there are many distractions, but the future is always created by those who can focus on the goal. Techno Phantom 6 with dual back camera and adjustable focusing technology. Never say it, show it.
The Honorable Minister of Information and Culture, Lai Mohammed, invites state commissioners, permanent secretaries and directors of information and all other stakeholders in the information sector to the 46th National Council on Information with the theme, Leveraging on Information and Digital Technology to Sustain the Change Agenda of Government. Chief host, Senator Dr. Ifeanyi Okowa, Governor of Delta State. Venue, Event Center Okpanam Road, Asaba, Delta State. Date, 26 to 29 October 2016. Program is as follows. Wednesday, 26 October 2016. Time, 12 noon to 3 p.m. Arrival and registration of participants. Thursday, 27 October 2016. Time, 8 a.m. to 9:30 a.m. Registration continues, and 9:30 a.m. to 6 p.m. is slated for the technical session. Friday, 28 October 2016. Time, 8 a.m. to 9 a.m. Registration of state commissioners. 9 a.m. to 12 noon. Opening ceremony. And from 12 noon to 6 p.m., the council meeting will take place. Announcer, Permanent Secretary, Federal Ministry of Information and Culture.
All right, you're welcome back to Good Morning Nigeria, reaching you on the network service of the Nigerian Television Authority. Now it's time for our business package, and the federal government is asking the African Development Bank to fast-track the release of the loan it applied for. Details of this story with our correspondent, Leah Katung Babatunde.
Now, the Central Bank of Nigeria, CBN, is expected to settle over-the-counter foreign exchange futures contract to the tune of $270.6 million on the interbank market this Wednesday. The transaction, to be settled on the FMDQ-OTC Securities Exchange, would be the 4th futures contract to mature since the introduction of the flexible foreign exchange regime. But analysts anticipate that the central bank would open a new futures contract expected to mature October 2017. Now, the Minister of Budget and National Planning, Senator Udoma has appealed to the African Development Bank, AFDB, to fast-track the $1 billion loan facility it promised the country as support for the 2016 budget. The loan is expected to cover the 35% shortfall in the budget. Now, Senator Udoma made this appeal in Abuja during a meeting with the AFDB team over the weekend while giving overview of the government's plan to reflate the economy and spend out of the recession. The minister said that government is trying to contain the militancy in the Niger Delta region, which has affected oil production in the country, hoping to restore production to 2.2 million barrels a day at the end of the year. He also stated that government is committing money into infrastructure development, processing of export zones, and also providing loans through the central bank at single digit to support farming in Nigeria. Speaking also at the meeting, the Director General of the Budget Office, Mr. Ben Akaboise, said that what the government is doing differently concerning budget releases is that it has shifted from the old practice of releasing monies quarterly, but on specific requests which are tied to projects. Mr. Kolibali, Acting Director for Governance and Reform, who spoke earlier, said that the AFDB team came to seek further clarification on policy reforms, levels of budget implementation as it touches capital budget releases. Meanwhile, a team of Egyptian investors have revealed major investment interest in Nigerian sports and pharmaceuticals industry. This, they say, is coming from the fact that Nigeria has many potentials yet untapped, especially as the economy faces recession with a growing number of unemployed Nigerians.
We have to develop our relations with all our brothers around Africa. We believe that Nigeria should be our first destination for this era, because we are sure that we can achieve something very remarkable together.
We are working to help the youth to educate them how to play sports, because our sporting club idea is not only just to have a sporting club, it's just also to have academies for each playing.
Pharmaceuticals, they say, is another critical sector of the economy to curtail medical tourism and forestall capital flight.
This is the only way, by the way, to fight recession. The economy of Nigeria is depending on petrol, so now why not to make it depend on other things, for example, and this will help growth.
So instead of importing the products, if they can manufacture the products in Nigeria, then Nigeria will start exporting the pharmaceuticals as well. We have the raw materials, we have the human capital.
They called on relevant authorities to create an enabling environment for investments to thrive, with specific requests for land acquisition to be made easy. Next is a closing summary of closing figures from the Nigerian Stock Exchange. And that's business news. Thanks for watching.
All right, thank you very much, Leah Katung Babatunde there on the business news segment. Time now for us to take a look at the dailies across the country, some of them, and of course get to know what stories made the front pages this Tuesday morning.
Bayo Toyobe, the Good Morning Nigeria newspaper reviewer, is here with us today as usual. Bayo, good morning and welcome to today's program.
Thank you, Kingsley. Good morning. Good morning, Rhoda. Good morning, Nigeria.
Okay, now we have a diversity of stories on the front pages of the various papers that we have for review this morning. Let's begin with the Punch and then straight on to Daily Trust as well as Vanguard in terms of their lead stories. Now, the Punch newspaper says APC governors tackle Buhari on appointments. And two writers allege president sidelines them in picking people for posts. And another writer says, we take responsibility for economic downturn. That's according to Okorocha, that's the governor of Imo State. Now, the same story, you have it on the front page of Daily Trust, as it's laid with a kicker. Ambassadors list. Buhari tells APC governors to put complaints in writing. That's the way it's headlined there for Daily Trust. Now, there are, of course, other stories on the judiciary as well as the fight against corruption. You have them on the front pages. Vanguard, that's the latest story for Vanguard. Election petitions. Judges to declare assets before and after judgment. That's according to the NJC. A number of writers there. Corruption killing judiciary, says CJN Mahmoud Mohammed. Sets up 10-member ethics committee led by Justice Kutigi. And media to be shut out on allegations of graft against judicial officers. And SANS to Buhari, kill corruption, spare Nigeria. NGOs accuse NJC of shielding suspected judges.
And let's move on now to the blueprint. The blueprint captions its headline this way, quite different from the ones Kingsley has read earlier. Land swap others. EFCC detains Bala Muhammad and grills Abati. Land swap and others. EFCC detains Bala Muhammad and grills Abati. That's the headline on the blueprint. Now, this day captions it this way. Presidency, NJC standoff continues as Council sets up Ethics Committee. Presidency, NJC standoff continues as Council sets up Ethics Committee. With the writer Falana insists arrested judges be placed on suspension. All right, Brian, let's look at this.
Well, the story being referred to is the ceremony yesterday where the Chief Justice of Nigeria instituted a 10-man committee to look into a review of the Code of Ethics of Judges. And that committee is headed by the SY Chief Justice of Nigeria, Justice Idris Lebo Kutigi. This was done at the unveiling of the judicial policy which the CJN reviewed yesterday. The judicial policy, according to the CJN, is to help the institution address the challenges it's facing regarding corruption. And the Chief Justice said corruption as a vice is not peculiar to any region, ethnic group, faith, level of education, or even economic status. And he specifically said that corruption has serious implications for the rule of law. Talking about setting up a committee, it may be recalled that Justice Kayode Esho, a retired chief judge of the Supreme Court, also had a committee set up. And the report of his committee had indicted an FCT chief judge and 15 other judges. This is as far back as 1994. The panel was set up by the late General Sani Abacha in 1995. It investigated the activities of the judiciary and made the recommendations for its reforms. Among the report, it found that 47 judicial officers were implicated in levels of corruption. And among these, there were 8 chief justices, 21 high court judges, and 18 magistrates. This was as far back as 1993. And you can imagine if something had been done then to nip this corruption that was growing in the board, that cancer or a small tumor would not have grown into the cancer that is plaguing the nation today. In fact, another panel headed by Justice B.O. Babalaki was set up to review the Esho report. But what happened? Just like many other reports, it's left on the shelf to gather dust. You will recall that for several years, there were crises, religious crises in Plateau, and the state government appointed a panel. The federal government also appointed a panel, and several other crises like that. Panels are appointed, and nothing seems to come out of it. At the end of the day, you find influences stopping the implementation of those reports. And this is why some critics of the public administration have said that those in public administration who know what to do, they act. Those who don't know what to do, appoint committees and let the committee's report gather dust. So there are efforts to tackle corruption, but they must be seen and taken headlong so that we rid our society of it. Related to that is that the former special advisor to Mr. President, former president on media, Dr. Ruben Abati, has also been invited by the Economic and Financial Crime. He's asked to explain what 50 million from the arms deal fund of 2.1 billion got to his office when he has an impressment to the office. Also invited is the former minister of the FCT. He is asked to explain irregularities noted in contracts. Meanwhile, the Attorney General of the Federation has revealed that the President Muhammad Buhari is also expected to sign an executive order that will promote transparency and efficiency, particularly in business environment, so as to encourage those who want to invest in the country. It will tackle contracting procedure and publishing of contracts. The whole idea is to make sure that everything that is done in government business is transparent and efficient and put in the public domain. Meanwhile, the acting chairman of the AFCC, Ibrahim Magu, while addressing a forum in Kaduna, Open Government Partnership, said that there is no hiding place for any corrupt public office holder. He dismissed insinuations that corruption investigation carried out by his agency is selective. He says EFCC engages in thorough investigation before arresting and prosecuting. Whoever we arrest for corruption must be guilty of it before we arrest him.
Okay, Baya, thank you very much there for the elaborate explanation. Just to indicate that the late Justice Kayode Esho was actually a justice of the Supreme Court. He wasn't Chief Justice.
Sorry. Yes, I said Justice of the Supreme Court. The former Chief Justice, I was referring to Justice Lebo Kutigi.
That's right. And then also the Chief Judges that were inducted were also not Chief Justices. But we have Chief Judges of State High Courts as well as of the Federal High Court. But thanks a lot. Let's return to the Punch newspaper. Above the nameplate of Punch newspaper, move your cattle out of FCT. Minister tells headsmen. Details of that on page 10. And on page 11, Senate probes diversion of 400 million naira polio fund. That's on page 11. You already have the story that Rhoda read out and Bayo already discussed. Ex-minister arrested for alleged contract fraud and 1 trillion naira land deal. That's on page 7. And the piece beside the nameplate of the Punch, weak institutions aided insurgency in Northeast, says Governor Bindo. And also on the front page there of the Punch newspaper, you have the Benin-Lagos highway blocked by Uselu market women protesting high cost of lockup stores at the Uselu market in Benin City. That took place yesterday. And NOA Peter to verify pensioners in Northeast. The story of the arrest of Ruben Abati, it's also there on the front page. EFCC arrests Jonathan spokesman Ruben Abati, page 11. Will not return 33.6 billion naira to Nolge, says Kwara government. That's on page 15. And Rhoda, let me just take these other headlines very briefly from Daily Trust and then return to you. Daily Trust, below the nameplate, petrol, 145 naira per litre, not sustainable. That's according to the NNPC. And also there it says NJC bars publication of petitions against judges. That's on page 3. And at the foot of the front page below the photograph of the traffic gridlock yesterday in the FCT, you have the following headlines. I don't care if Obaseki betrays me. That's according to Oshomole. Oshomole, of course, leaves office in a couple of days. And police arrest 13-man rape syndicate in Yobe. And MTN suspends dividend payout. That's on page 13.
All right, this day, just above the masthead, NNPC sale of petrol at 145 is no longer sustainable. Product is subsidized. With riders, Chinese investors arrived today to hold talks on 5.5 billion naira, $1 billion investment in oil and gas, and inter-ministerial committee to work on MOUs inaugurated. Nigeria, EU to begin talks on sending economic migrants home. And if you move down just beside the picture story, you find APC accepts responsibility for economic hardship in the country. Lalong confirms ambassadorial list was drawn up without consultation. Talen Bugajay turned down nomination. And a Senate probe, just at the foot of the paper, Senate probe CBN orders banks to suspend payment of MTN dividends. That's on page 10 of this day. Now let's quickly move to the blueprint just below the picture story. We already read the headline story for the blueprint this morning. Let's move down below the picture story. As the same story, we take responsibility for economic woes, says APC. That's on page 6. Senate probes $400 million polio fund. That's on page 6. And no cattle on FCT roads. Bello insist. No cattle on FCT roads, Bello insists. That's on page 7 of the blueprint. And jailbreaks, I won't tolerate excuses anymore, says precinct boss. And finally on page 32, Chinese firms plans $1 billion investment in Nigeria. The Chinese firm plans a $1 billion investment in Nigeria. That's on page 32.
Well, the 145 naira petrol price that NNPC is said to be not viable, not realistic now, it is relating to the foreign exchange. You recall that about a month ago, particularly when the naira to the dollar was on ascendancy and naira was seriously depreciated, the independent market, petroleum marketers actually said it was no longer viable for them. And the central bank had intervened to say that a special dispensation will be provided them at the foreign exchange level so as to serve as a cushion from that. So I think that is the same issue now that is coming about considerably. At that, compared that time and now, you will realize that the dollar has gained some more grounds against, the naira has gained more grounds against the dollar than at that time. Meanwhile, the report about the governors expressing concern about their citizens from their state being appointed relates to the ambassadorial nominees the president sent to the National Assembly. The governors felt that they should have made some contributions into it. But this was at a meeting by the APC Governors Forum as a prelude to the Governors Economic Council meeting that is scheduled today. They essentially said they met and they reached 3 kind decisions. One was to appreciate the release of 21 Chibok girls and also to congratulate Mr. President about the agricultural initiative. Already they are reporting bumper harvest from their various constituencies, and also the anti-corruption war to ask the president not to relent. However, the governors that expressed concern, 6 of them went as a delegation to see Mr. President, and he said they should put their complaints in writing. Quickly, there's this human interest story. Heading the football is one of the actions of footballers when they use the head to play the ball. But a study by a Scotland University hospital, Stirling Hospital, says that players who head the ball with the head could be endangering their brain. A study has revealed that after heading the ball for several times, the memory of such player is depreciated for a short period. And this is between 41 to 67% after the test. It was said to be temporary. You also recall that the late Muhammad Ali suffered from Parkinson's syndrome, and it was also expected as speculated that it was part of the serious punches to the head. Therefore, the head that controls all the parts of the body certainly is the king of the body and needs to be protected.
Well, Bayo, thanks a lot. What we have in Nigeria, I mean, a great footballer. He was a member of the national team. His nickname was Headmaster. That's Mutiu Adepoju. Yes. There's no indication that he has suffered any head injury anyway. So, Vaya Toyobi, we'd like to thank you for being with us. Just before we take off the newspaper review segment, briefly from Vanguard newspaper front page, says, tension as truckloads of herdsmen and cattle arrive in Enugu community. Details of that story can be found on page 15. So that's as much that we can take for our reviews this morning. Bayo, thank you for being with us. We'll see you again tomorrow.
Thank you. Tomorrow will be another, God willing.
All right, we'll take a short break now. When we return from the break, it will be time for us to discuss the role of the legislature in the fight against corruption.
Nigerians. Suicide bombers are not spirits. They are not ghosts. They are human beings like you and me. They live amongst us. They are your neighbors. They are your friends today, but terrorists tomorrow. So you must know your neighbor now. Security begins with you and me. Know your neighbor. Be vigilant. Be security conscious. Report suspicious persons, objects, and movements to the police and other security agencies. The security of our nation is a duty for you and me.
If you see something, say something. Nigeria unite against terrorism. This message is brought to you by the Federal Ministry of Information and Culture.
Helen! Would you like some water? It's cold, especially for you.
Which era are you living in? We have a fridge.
When everything else in your house is from the present, then why are your toilet cleaning methods from the past? Harpic, all-in-one for you. Compared to other toilet cleaners, Harpic removes top stains, kills all germs, and removes bad odors for a shining clean and fresh toilet.
Wow.
You should also take the Harpic
all-in-one challenge.
Introducing new Dettol multi-surface cleaner for a healthy home. Some cleaners don't kill germs, others kill germs but don't clean properly. New Dettol multi-surface cleaner gives you 10 times better germ kill, 10 times better cleaning, and all-day freshness for a healthy home.
Germs, oil and dirt cause blemishes and uneven skin tone. You need Dettol Even Tone. It removes 99.9% of germs and is formulated to remove excess oil and dirt, helping to reduce blemishes. New Dettol Even Tone.
Call of change, stand up, Nigeria. Change is here and it's going to stay. Change begins with you. Oh yeah, make we go. Go so let the change begin from within. Look at you, okay, ruler. Change begins with you and me. Change begins with me. Change begins with me. Change begins with me.
All right, now to prepare the stage for our discussion on the role of the legislature in the fight against corruption, we join our correspondent, Ngozi Chude, for this backgrounder.
Corruption, a word synonymous with decay, and undoubtedly one of the greatest challenges of our time in Nigeria. A challenge that has led to impoverishment, loss of lives, and a dwindling economy. Nigeria's unenviable record in corruption has gained her an unprecedented attention with the international community, pressurizing her to tame its excesses. With the democratic dispensation in 1999 came a renewed drive to fight corruption, but these did not yield the desired result. However, with the emergence of Muhammadu Buhari as Nigeria's president in 2020, Patrick Lumumba said for Nigeria, and by extension Africa, to develop, Nigerian leaders must be ready to battle the cankerworm. Lumumba, a professor of law, described Nigeria as a microcosm of Africa and as such could not afford to get things wrong.
The day Nigeria rises, that is the day Africa rises. You may not know, but 1 out of every 5 Africans is a Nigerian.
Senate President Abubakar Bukola Saraki said that a conscious effort by the 3 arms of government is necessary in achieving total eradication. It revealed that through legislative supervision, the nation uncovered monumental leakages in the operationality of the Treasury single account, which in effect saved the country over 20 billion naira. He said the National Assembly is ready to continue to use its legislative time and authority to reform key areas of the laws that will strengthen Nigeria's institutions. In this capacity, he informed the audience that the Whistleblowers Bill is one of the priority bills the National Assembly expects to be passed into law, which would consequently help create a culture of greater freedom to expose corruption and guarantee the rights of citizens who speak out against corruption.
As we play our part in the legislature, other arms of government must be determined to do the same. It is my view that the judiciary on its part must take steps to modernize itself, create an environment that ensure a speedy and quality of justice. They must be able to give what is necessary to support the executive and the legislative arm.
Analysts believe these and other strategies by the legislature and other arms of government are steps in the right direction. But what is attracting attention is how achievable is this? How can this help in the fight against corruption? This is what we will be focusing on. Good morning, Nigeria today.
All right, right, thank you very much, Ngozi Chude, for that background report. Of course, that's a prompt for our conversation this morning on the role of legislature in the fight against corruption. And we're being joined by a couple of guests here in Abuja and our Benin studio. But first of all, I'd like to introduce the Executive Secretary, Presidential Advisory Committee Against Corruption, Professor Bolaji Owosanwoye. I hope I got that right.
Owosanwoye. You tried.
All right, thank you very much. Welcome to Good Morning Nigeria.
Thank you for inviting me.
And of course, a regular on our program, he is the Lead Director, Center for Justice, Mr. Eze Onyekmere. Mr. Eze Onyekmere, it's good to have you join us again this morning.
My pleasure.
And finally, we have in our Benin Network Center, we're being joined by a Professor of History and International Relations of the University of Benin. He is Professor Benson Osadolo. We're pleased to have you join us on Good Morning Nigeria today.
Thank you so much. Good morning.
But also, I'd like to also indicate that we have we have requested that some legislators join us on this discussion, and we hope that before the program is over, they'll be able to join us on this discussion this morning. All right, Kingsley.
All right, Rhoda, thanks a lot. And then once again, we'd like to appreciate the presence of our guests. Every day now the talk is virtually about how to kill corruption before it kills Nigeria. And our perspective this morning is to evaluate what should be the effective role of the legislature in this process. And therefore, we begin by posing the question, is there a gap from what we see at the moment in the legislative approach to the fight against corruption? Let's begin from our right, Mr. Onyekmere.
Well, very well. The legislature is there by the constitution that's supposed to be lawmakers, including exercising the power of appropriation. They're supposed to exercise oversight over the management and use of public resources in a bid to make better laws, in a bid to plug the loopholes and stop corruption. They also represent the people. But what we have seen so far, you cannot totally give them a very good pass mark. They are doing something, but it's not as much as Nigerians will want them to do. In the area of lawmaking, you see, of late, we've been talking a lot about, what I consider to be the poverty of remedial justice. We have been complaining that people abuse the laws. People who were not supposed to be somewhere have been appointed into places they were not supposed to be. So if the legislature can begin to become proactive by looking at the mischief in existing law, and on the basis of that mischief, they begin to plug the gaps and loopholes in the laws, then we may not be exactly where we are. Take, for instance, the issue of the audit. The audit law we have is a very old one. And over the years, we've had issues about the audit law coming up, 5th Senate, 6th Senate, 7th Senate, and House of Reps, and nothing happened. So we expect a situation where instead of crying after the event, we begin to plug those loopholes. We begin to make sure that people do not commit those financial felonies and misdemeanors, so that at the end of the day, we cry less. Because if these loopholes are plugged, take also the example of the Public Accounts Committee in the legislature, which is the only committee provided in the Constitution for both the Senate and the House. We should look at the report of the Auditor General. We have a situation that since 1999, they've not had the presence of mind to finish reporting for 1 year and send it either to the House or to the Senate to approve of it. This is a committee of the House. And that committee's report becomes a report of the House when it is sent to the House and it is approved by the Committee of the Whole. Since 1999, we've not had anything of that nature done, both in the House and in the Senate. So like I am saying, you have an example of a constitutional committee in the legislature and how they've performed. You also have the example of lawmaking, which you have been used proactively and which has not been done. But like I'm saying, it's important that their attention is drawn to these loopholes and what they can do better, so that in the course of legislation, in the course of committee work, and in the course of oversight, they can begin to take a proactive stance to curb corruption.
Well, Mr. Onyekmere, thanks a lot. Let's move over now to Professor Bolaji Owosanwoye. Professor Owosanwoye, what's your take on this? Do you find a gap in the legislative approach to the fight against corruption?
Oh, definitely. And they recognize this too. As you may be aware, last week, the Committee Against Corruption, we were engaging with the legislature to look at how better they can do what they have to do.
Talking about fighting corruption, the legislature is actually best placed to help us deal with corruption. Besides the fact that they have power to appropriate, and if they appropriate very well, and then they have the power to investigate as a backup. Indeed, Section 88(2) of the Constitution is very specific about their power of investigation. It says it is a power given to them to enable and strengthen them to expose corruption. It's there in the Constitution. But unfortunately, the legislature has not played this role as well as we would like to see them do. Talking about gaps in legislation, which Eze mentioned, I agree. In the 7th Assembly, a number of bills were put before the legislature which would help Nigeria to fight corruption. Just to underscore how the legislature view these bills, the importance of these bills to them. They did not look at those bills until the dying minutes, to the extent that in the last day or thereabout, about 53 bills were passed. About 7 of those were critical to fighting corruption. Proceeds of Crime Act, Crime Data Register, Whistleblower, Witness Protection. They were all included in the last set of bills that they passed. One was on Nigerian Financial Intelligence Act. Now, a legislature that is very sensitive to his role and the need to plug these gaps would not leave such bills. They've been with them. In fact, some of those bills were carried over from the 6th legislature to the 7th legislature. Now, we've done 1 whole year of the 8th Assembly. These bills are still not been put before them. Granted that they are considering other bills, but we're looking at their role because we know that it's corruption that has set Nigeria back. When they appropriate for projects, major projects that will grow the economy, that will deliver infrastructure and all that, they don't take the next step to make sure that the money is spent for purpose.
All right, thank you very much, Bolaji. But then let's get to Professor Benson Osadolo, who's in our Benin Network Center. You've listened to Eze Onyekwere also too, and Bolaji is also saying here that, you know, any good legislature is actually supposed to be, you know, ahead in terms of the fight against corruption. But then let's get your take on it also. Is there a gap as to the way that the legislature is actually fighting corruption?
Well, the first thing to talk about here is to look at the provisions in the Constitution concerning the role of the legislature in the anti-corruption campaign. Section 88, subsection 2B, clearly defines the role of the legislature, which states as follows: to expose corruption, inefficiency, and waste, both in the appropriation and disbursement of funds. Now, when we discuss that gap in terms of the legislative role in the fight against corruption, is to see whether or not they have been able to meet that constitutional requirements as stated in the 1999 Constitution. Look at the National Assembly and state assemblies. I mean, from 1999, it's a history of a cycle of corruption and corrupt practices leveled against the leadership of either the Senate or House of Representatives or even the state legislatures. And so we find today a situation where an institution of government that is empowered by law to expose and fight corruption is in itself embroiled in corruption. And then we look at the other aspect of understanding what corruption is. Corruption is simply a violation of established rules and laws for personal gains and profits. Now, if the legislative institution is expected to make laws for the fight against corruption, and the laws are made, and they are not able to follow up to ensure that these laws protect Nigerians and our leaders against corrupt practices, of what essence is the legislative institution? Personally, I believe that as far as the legislature is concerned, it's a kind of representative democracy. And that is why it is stated as the first institution of government. Unfortunately, those that are elected to represent the people do not actually understand the essence of their election, do not understand the essence of their mandate. They go to the National Assembly only to begin to contest positions and priorities with the executive over funds, how money is disbursed, how funds are administered. That is not the role of the legislature. You agree with me very sincerely that if you are going to fight and win the war against corruption, the legislative institution has a major role to play. But this has not been the case with Nigeria since 1999, and we are worried about it.
All right, Professor Osadolo speaking to us from our Benin Network Center. We'll come back to you, of course, on the course of this conversation. Just to return to our Abuja studios, there's a point that Prof has just made now, and I would like us to also explore it. They say when the head is rotten, of course, the rest of the body is equally diseased. Now, Mr. Onyekpere and Professor Owasonye, when you spoke, we were looking at it from, say, the headwaters. At the federal level, what is the role of your legislature? But he says, take a look also at the state legislatures. And when you have a composite picture of the rot that you find at the state level, particularly also at the local government level, then we can begin to have a better appreciation of why we are in this state of arrested development. From your perspective, what do you think has also been wrong with the state legislature in approaching the fight against corruption, even in their own limited jurisdiction? Let's begin again with Onyekpere.
Yeah, what is happening at the federal level is replicated or is even worse when you look at what is happening at the state level. Well, let me also put these things in proper context. I'm sure we are all living witnesses to the clampdown in the judiciary and what we heard about the role of the judiciary in the fight against corruption, and people saying that a corrupt judge is even worse than an armed robber. So are we also talking about the premier role of the legislature. And so also should we talk about the premier role of the chief executive, the president or the governor who can run elections and swore to an oath of office. Now, I want to see, like for instance, Prof did mention, those bills that were passed at the dying minutes of the last administration, the new president still had the discretion or still had the powers under the constitution to sign and assent to those bills to become law. From what he has said, that did not happen. Because if you recall, laws like public procurement and fiscal responsibility were passed under Obasanjo. He didn't sign them, but it was the Yar'Adua administration that signed them into law. Even the Audit Act we are complaining about had been approved by the legislature, passed on 2 occasions, but the executive did not sign them. So for us to have a good war against corruption, there must be collaboration and cooperation between the executive, the legislature, and the judiciary. For instance, I had expected the administration that is on board now with anti-corruption mantra as one of its cornerstones to have been able to identify the key pieces of legislation it needed for institutionalizing this process beyond the incumbent, and then moved it to the legislature, which is also led and people by mainly people from the same political party. So within the confines of their party, they agree that these are the pieces of law we need, and then move from there. At the state level, the governor is king. You dare not oppose the governor.
The king or emperor?
The emperor, yeah. That's why, if you recall, some time ago, the National Assembly, at the time they gave themselves financial autonomy, also granted the same autonomy to the state houses of assembly. And instead of accepting it, state houses of assembly voted to support federal legislative autonomy and voted against themselves to go cap in hand. So such a supine, subservient legislature without people who are courageous, how do you expect them to fight corruption? And it also boils down to the recruitment process, political recruitment process. How do you even get nominated in your party to stand for House of Assembly? You cannot get nominated in any party if the governor does not support you. The governor stays in his bedroom, maybe with his wife and children and cronies, and writes the list. So how can you expect that kind of team to be able to exercise those constitutional powers, to be able to hold the executive to account? So it becomes a question of some form of clique between the executive and the legislature, and also transport that to the judiciary, and that's why you see what is happening. You cannot be a judge if you don't have contacts in the political powers that be. And that's why when they were criticizing judges and saying, I said, the institutional process should be, first of all, to look at the process of appointing judges. Should it be a process you leave to politicians to appoint and later we begin to complain? I've always held a view that it should be announced like a Catholic bans of marriage. Let it be known that Ezonyebere wants to be a judge. Whoever has anything, complaints about the level of my education and learning, that I'm not sound enough in legal principles, or even my character, that I'm a drunk, that I womanize, that I do this, that I steal public money, should come forward and bring the facts so that an impartial committee will look at it and then take a decision. If I'm found deficient on any of the scores, I shouldn't be there. So what I'm saying in essence is that we have a political system that contributes to whatever is happening, whether it's in the legislature, judiciary, or executive. And until we get to the root of it, we may not exactly have that change.
Well, Mr. Onyekure, thanks a lot. You've already elaborated on the point I will still return to in the course of this conversation, which is to say the joint responsibility of various institutions. But we're dealing in the meantime now with the legislative role. And the question I asked you, you've already touched on it as well, but let me pose the same question to Professor Owasonye. Professor Owasonye, at the state level, have we seen a legislature, or have we seen state legislatures that approximate the constitutional requirement in terms of fulfilling their mandate with respect to dealing with corruption, inefficiency, and waste?
No, of course not. And this is because of the overbearing influence of the executive, as he has said. Just as the federal legislature enjoy a first-line charge on their revenue, on their own funds, it's obvious that the state legislature also deserve this. Regrettably, they lack the strength, both moral and legal, unfortunately, to challenge the executive. I mean, even though we are not entirely satisfied, even with the federal legislature, but in terms of asserting themselves, they are far better than the state legislature. And this actually, as Eze has said, goes deep down to how they emerge. First of all, the quality of people who emerge. They do not seem to have a mind of their own. And when suggestions are put before them that are beneficial to their own interests, that will help them fulfill their constitutional mandate, they have not been able to see it through. You know, I mean, if, for example, they pass a measure for first-line charge of their funds and the executive vetoes it, they have the power under the Constitution, you know, to override the executive. But they've not been able to do so. They seem to be crying and all that. It's the same reason why many of them, the legislatures are aware that the executive largely tampers with the funds of local governments, but they can't talk. And yet, this is supposed to be a representative democracy. So it starts from how those who contest emerge from the political parties, who sponsors them, okay? The quality of their own education. I mean, I'm sorry to say this, but if you go to some state legislature, what you will find, because of this constitutional requirement that you don't need more than primary school or something like that.
Some school certificates.
I mean, it's just terrible. It's just terrible. So there are people who just sit there for 365 days a year if they appear that much, and whatever is brought before them is just rubber stamped, you know. So unless we change the process for how people emerge and whittle down very significantly in order to establish this constitutional separation of powers. Separation of powers does not mean lack of cooperation. We still need cooperation, but at least each one must have, you know, its own line, and the boundaries must be there. You know, we will not get very far. So I'm saying that just changing the law may not help. You need to change the quality of the people who end up serving in the legislature. Otherwise, they will not be able to appropriate the constitutional provisions that will help them, you know, to improve the lot of the people. So that's why whatever development you see happening at states depend on how dynamic governors are, not because the legislature is able to hold them to account. Otherwise, you see nothing. That's why in some states, nothing happens. In some states, something happens. It's not because the legislature, which is what they're supposed to do. The legislature is supposed to keep the executive on their toes. They appropriate funds. They have power to investigate how the money is used, and that the money should be used for purpose. But, you know, if they lack strength, both moral and otherwise, how can they do that?
All right, thank you very much, Professor Owasonye. Let's bring in Professor Benson Osadolo. You were the one that actually prompted this talking head right now, that is looking at it from the state level. But then they have gone further to say that the process by which some of these people at the state level emerges, if not worked upon or if not looked into, is a major issue as to what we see at the state legislature. Not forgetting that at some point, these are the same people that also end up moving to the federal legislature.
Well, it's very obvious. We already have a constitution in this country. which prescribes the conditions under which anybody, any Nigerian, can contest election to the legislature, whether at the federal, state, or local levels. What is worrisome about the constitutional provision is the reduction of the level of education to a point where it is difficult to imagine how somebody with a school certificate can understand the laws of the land and the constitution, interpret it and work with it. It's a basic problem. For instance, go to local governments all over the country. There are many. And every local government has what is called legislative arm. Do those elected there at the local government level understand what is legislation? Do they understand what is law? Because even at the state level now, again, those who are elected there, do they understand what is meant by the powers and control of the legislature over public funds? So it's a matter of education and enlightenment and the quality of those that we send to represent us. But you know, since 1999, in the history of this country, our politics, it's been such that, well, an investment for those who have the resources to sponsor candidates. And then they go there and see what they can get, not what they can do for the country. What is sad about Nigerian politics is that no one is talking about the survival of the nation. From the Senate to the House of Representatives, no one is talking about national survival. Corruption will destroy the country. They are aware of it, but their interest is personal gains, personal profit. What they're able to get when they are in Abuja, what they're able to get when they are in the state capitals. Take one example. I'll be glad if you can publish on NTA the comparison of what Nigerian legislators earn with other legislators all over the world, particularly at the National Assembly. Let Nigerians see it and begin to debate about it. It's the highest in the world. Even though as other democracies and economies that are stronger than Nigeria, they don't pay much as what we pay. Yet, we are talking about the fight against corruption. Let me briefly state here. Look at what happened in Brazil when there was this allegation against the president over budget padding. Look at the quality of debates in parliament, in the impeachment process of their presidents. Look at the same situation in Nigeria. Everybody is quiet. You turn right, you don't want to offend anybody. You turn left, you don't want to offend your party leader. You turn to the front, you don't want to offend those that sponsored you. You go to your back, you are worried about yourself. So this is where we think, as far as this country is concerned, education is very important. A minimum of a first degree, not even a third class or a pass degree, second class lower should be prescribed for those that will go to that chambers to make laws for this country and also understand and interpret the kind of laws they are making to ensure that we succeed in this country in the fight against corruption. Nigeria should not be where it is today. Look at the whole world. Nigeria is the only country in recession. Why? Because of corruption. How do we fight it?
Professor Osadolo, thanks a lot for your contribution. Just to raise two issues, Rhoda. It says minimum of first degree. I'm sure that will also include its equivalent, which is the HND. Otherwise, you raise the whole debate about the dichotomy that is prevalent in the appreciation of first degree holders as well as HND. And then the point he also talked about the legislature at the local government level. About 10 years ago, I was embarrassed, by a notice I saw pasted somewhere around Ikeja in Lagos. It was in fulfillment of a publication requirement. The notice by the local government legislative was riddled with all kinds of errors. After I read a couple of lines, I shook my head and walked away. But gentlemen, let's continue the conversation. The point that Mr. Onyekpere also raised, I would like us to explore it further. Now, the fight against corruption, of course, is gaining momentum, not just because of what is happening around us, but because there's a great deal of talk about it. There's also a great deal of action that we are seeing. But Onyekpere says something. In terms of approach, and this is also particularly useful for the committee of which Professor Owasanye is executive secretary, has the administration adopted a strategic approach in the fight against corruption? For instance, again, as Onyekwere said, the administration, or has the administration, or will the administration now say, look, what are those laws that are impeding or likely to impede the fight against corruption? What are those laws that are likely, or will most likely, facilitate the fight against corruption on the basis, for instance, of the laws that were passed in rapid fire by the 7th Assembly?
Okay, very well. I think, like said earlier, we need to institutionalize the process so that it can begin to run on autopilot. Whether Eze is there or Buhari or Wasanoye is there, it doesn't matter. Like they have it in other parts of the world. So once you run foul of the rules, even if you're president, you get kicked out, like happened in Brazil. So I want to see the administration identify certain laws and policies which they will use to institutionalize the fight against corruption. And for me, I would like to talk about the audit law, which I've spoken for before. I would also like us to have a law to make public the declaration of assets of public officials. They've talked about laws establishing specific agencies to strengthen them, whether it's EFCC or ICPC or other pieces of legislation. Also, the Freedom of Information Act should be implemented to the letter, because if it is implemented to the letter, there'll be a lot of transparency. And once you have a lot of transparency, it promotes and helps the fight against corruption. So it should be a strategic initiative that says A, B, C, D are the laws we need. EDF are policies we need to push harder. And these are policies we need to discourage, so that at the end of the day, the process begins to drive itself. And then identify those laws that are currently also impeding this fight, whether there are constitutional provisions. For instance, the autonomy of local governments. That came up in the last administration. The National Assembly passed it. I think the state houses of assembly were unable to pass it. And recently, the president has said that he's in full support of that autonomy. So I hope that whenever the constitution amendment process starts again, these are some of the issues that should be pushed in such a way that the process becomes driving itself and becomes more strategic and institutionalized over the long term.
Thank you very much, Eze Onyekwere. But then just before we take our tweets, our viewers are beginning to take advantage of our Twitter handle at NTA GMN. And if you're watching, you can be a part of this conversation when you tweet at us at NTA GMN. Let's take our tweets first, because I'd like Professor Owasanye to also speak to this issue. But then let's take our tweets first. All right, the very first one is from Yusuf Momo. He says, corruption is still in our system and is still ongoing. The only visible fighter of the endemic is Muhammadu Buhari so far.
All right, then we have this from Maga Station. I don't know what that means, but that's his handle. It says, what we have in Nigeria is fighting and disgracing opponents. But for fear of Buhari, even those in the studio will never say the truth.
And this one is from Oladimedi Olani. He says, the immunity clauses aiding corruption amongst public office holders.
Well, Olani continues, the legislative arm of government will do a good job if they can unite to remove immunity clause from the Constitution.
Donatus Abos says, unfair wages allowances is a form of corruption. Wages above the salaries of the highest paid civil servants to the National Assembly is unfair.
And Jamil Sadara says the first step to fight corruption by the legislature is by cutting their salaries. For the huge money they bag is no longer sustainable.
Oversight function is a constitutional way legislators can help in fighting corruption, but we ain't seeing transparency in this.
Ibenemed Dominic, our legislature is currently the nest of our corrupt executive. For now, they are not interested in saving Nigeria from corruption.
Prince Sky tweets, nobody is fighting corruption in Nigeria. Federal government is just using the opportunity to fight their personal enemies.
We have this again from Dominic. It says, let the legislature pass a single chamber bill, in other words, of the dual chambers that we have, and amend laws that enrich them at our expense. They have failed in this fight. Well, those are some of the tweets that we are taking in the meantime. We'll return again to your contributions. Professor Owasanye, what's your take on this in terms of the government articulating a strategic approach to the fight against corruption, identifying properly laws that could facilitate this process?
Well, first of all, I think the Attorney General has sent in some bills. He sent in a money laundering bill to the National Assembly under this watch. Last week, when we engaged with the legislature, one of the key points of conversation were legislations that would go back, bills that would go back to the National Assembly. And it was a primer for us to, first of all, have a conversation around them. It includes the Process of Crime Act, the Whistleblower, Witness Protection, an amendment to this Asset Declaration Bill, 90, an amendment to the 90 Bill. There was also an amendment to Public Procurement Bill and all that. So it's not as if there are no legislations or bills that have been proposed to the National Assembly. The problem is how zealous are they about those critical bills. And one of the reasons, and one of these tweets underscores the point, almost 15% of those who are in the legislature, in the Senate in particular, are former chief executive of states who have corruption cases against them. Their zeal to fight corruption, your guess is as good as mine. But of course, they can prove us wrong. So that's one point. So we have this problem with recycling. And once you have a problem with recycling, and the people who are leaving the executive position to go and become lawmakers are people who have one thing or the other to hide, they're not going to be very zealous about fighting corruption. But if we assume that the majority who have nothing to hide are willing and ready to fight, then we could still make progress. The truth of the matter is that this is an inevitable crusade. It's either we face up to it to challenge corruption, or there'll be no Nigeria really, honestly, to deal with. Then the second point has to do with the remuneration, which has been talked about. Quite true. There is merit in this criticism of the legislature. From 1999 to date, the legislature, the National Assembly in particular, have increased their own budget by over 2,000%, from about 6 billion to about 150 billion. Now, granted, this year is not up to 150 billion. It's about 115 or thereabout billion, but it's gone up astronomically. Granted that it is not as if all that money is shared, divided by 400 and whatever legislators. They have the administrative arm to deal with. They have a few subsidiary, they have a few agencies that are under the legislature. But the sore point is that they have refused to make public how this 150 is spent. They've refused to make public. We know that there is the Public Complaints Commission under them. We know there is the Budget Research Office. We know there is the National Institute for Legislative Studies. Then we know there is the National Assembly Commission itself, the service, and then the legislators. If they receive reports from the executive of how money was spent, why on earth shouldn't the legislature put in the public domain how they spend the money appropriated? And this extends also to the executive, okay? Every arm of government has a duty, and it is also constitutional, to tell Nigerians how they have spent money that has been appropriated. So one of the things that has weakened the legislature, in my view, is the fact that they have refused to be open about their own budget. They have refused to be open for once and for all. Put it out there in the public domain and let this controversy die a natural death. But they refused to do that. The current Senate president made a promise early on in his tenure to say he was going to publish the accounts of the National Assembly. 1 year after, he has not done so. And I think that he needs to do so in order to regain, for the legislature to regain the confidence of the public.
All right, thank you very much, Professor Wosawoye. We'll take a break now, and when we return, of course, we'd like Professor Benson Sadler to also speak to this issue. We'll take a break now, and we'll be back.
Who are you, and what is your predicament?
Please, I'm looking for Candy, who is living here, in this compound.
Oh no, this is a premises. A compound is an amalgam of chemicals, and there is no Candy living in this premises.
This week on your award-winning comedy series, Professor John Bull, starring Kanayo Okanayo, Mercy Johnson, Queen Wokoye, Funky Malam, Bimbo Akintola, Ime Bishop, Yomi Fash Lanso, MC for God.
Who was you? What was you found?
Auntie, I look at you. I going to look for my sister. I know you are for.
Here. And he was found the place. Call me. Okay?
Say somebody.
She's definitely not my sister.
Shut up!
Professor John Bull, fasten your seatbelts this Tuesday and Friday, 8:30 to 9 p.m. on NTA Network, International, and Star Times. It's absolutely bombastic.
Over and out. The largest data network, Glow, grandmasters of data.
Hey, I just had a shower, but why do I still feel so hot and sweaty?
Let me finish this and I will show you something surprising. Let's take a look. See, heat means sweat. Sweat brings germs. Dettol 100 times cool. It removes germs to leave you feeling clean, fresh, and 100 times cool. Beat the heat and germs with Dettol 100 times cool.
Dettol, endorsed by the Nigerian Medical Association.
We intend to radically change Newman Street. My company has a track record of converting slums into new cities. Many years of experience has taught us to fish out allies within the communities we want to transform.
Don't listen to your husband. Listen to me. Give me a boy. And the two of you may never even have to work again.
Sharp guy, how are you? What's your name?
Akpos.
America. Oh, Akpos, America.
One. Love you too.
Wonderful wonder. Wonderful wonder. Wonderful.
All right, you're welcome back, and it's still Good Morning Nigeria. We are reaching you on the network service of the Nigerian Television Authority. Just before we went on the break, the two guests with us here in the Abuja studios had, of course, given their opinions on what they thought needed to be done with regard to the effective role of the legislature in the fight against corruption. Let's go back to our Benin Network studios, where we still have Professor Benson Osadolo. Professor Osadolo, you listen to the guests speak here. What, in your opinion, is needed to be done in order, as it were, to either force the hands of the legislature? Professor Awosonye was saying, look, when you scan the profile of some of the lawmakers, these are former state chief executives, and some of them might not be too enthusiastic in seeking to press on with legislation that might therefore compromise them. How do we get out of this self-dealing or this self-interest that is ultimately injurious to our Commonwealth?
Well, certainly I think that may be difficult to get out of it, considering the political culture of Nigeria at the moment. What I think, like you said before, that has made the legislature to be very weak is because of this same caliber of people who believe that after they have served as governors, they have no other business to do in life other than to go to the National Assembly as senators. And then there, they continue to oppress Nigerians and oppress the people with the kind of things they do over there. So people just believe that, well, if you are served as governor, you are not a businessman, you are not a professional, you don't have a career. And so the next career to pursue or profession to pursue is to go to the National Assembly. National Assembly, the Senate, of course, for most governors who have left offices, is another form of employment for them. But you see, I think that is the wrong perception we have about politics in this country. We need to think and begin to work towards building strong and viable legislative institutions in Nigeria. Take, for example, very recently, there was a whistleblower from the House of Representatives. After he spoke about the issue of budget padding, he said something very interesting that many Nigerians just ignored. For example, he said he received 650 million naira for being the chairman of the House Appropriation Committee. Some other members also received monies in millions, worth over billions. Now, how did the House appropriate such funds for that purpose? This is the corruption that we are talking about. An institution that is riddled with corruption and corrupt practices cannot fight corruption. The way the National Assembly, the Senate itself, with all those characters that are there, whether past governors or deputy governors or whatsoever, the way it is composed, they cannot fight corruption. We have 109 senators. Go and read the hazards of debates and look at the quality of their contribution. It's zero. We have 360 members of the House of Representatives. Go and read the hazards of debates and look at their own war against corruption. It's zero. They talk about bills, about bills, about bills. How committed are they to it? There are three categories of leadership you find among lawmakers. The first, those who have the political will to fight corruption. The second, those who have the commitment to fight corruption. The third, those that have the integrity to stand by whatever they do. We don't have them there. That is the problem with this country, and it's quite sad. But my prayer is that the next generation of lawmakers in this country would have learned from history and then begin to rebuild these institutions. There is no way we can fight corruption if we don't have the support of the legislature. Frankly speaking, what the presidency is doing now, what the executive is doing now, is actually what the National Assembly should have been doing. And that is exactly what should have been done at state levels. When local government chairmen, they are accused of corruption, the legislative arm is supposed to be investigating and probing all of these allegations. Yet, they are part of the same sharing formula. It's sad. Quite sad.
It makes the situation here looks really hopeless. But then we'll continue to speak to the issues and try to find a way out. But then let's take some of our tweets that we're getting right now. This one is from Change to Progress. It said, don't blame legislatures for their lackadaisical approach to anti-corruption. Majority of Nigerians have accepted it as a way of life.
And we have this tweet from Ibrahim Tulu. It says, federal and state assemblies must not see the anti-corruption crusade as a federal government task only. They must lead the fight now.
And Ibrahim Yusuf Balami says, APC-led government is fighting a war it never prepared before the 2015 election. Plan now or fail Nigeria.
And Victor PJ says, corruption can never be eradicated until there are strong policies guiding the lawmakers. And
Ibrahim Tudu tweets again, the Presidential Anti-Corruption Advisory Council should carry along the private sector, the CSOs, and the media. They need their cooperation.
And we have another tweet from Orog Bangba Olagoke. It says, unfortunately, lawmakers that are supposed to curb corruption are themselves corrupted, unpatriotic, and incompetent.
And religious leaders, this one is from Change to Progress again. It says, religious leaders must start preaching honesty against corruption in churches, mosques, and query huge donations. If we don't do that, we won't kill corruption.
Shitu 10 writes, there is a silent, harsh, common sense revolution going on. Whether lawmakers like it or not, they either join or they will be swept aside. So those are some of the tweets that we're taking at this time. But let's return to the conversation. Mr. Yopuri, earlier you also talked about joint responsibility. I would like us to elaborate on this. Yes, our focus this morning.
This confusion about what do you do with the recommendations from legislative committees and the motions. And members of the National Assembly were complaining that they passed so many motions and there have been so many committee reports that the executive failed to follow up on. So I am expecting a situation where there should be that harmony between the executive and the legislature, particularly, so that even when they probe, if the executive don't pick it up to implement, it will still be lying there like dry letters on parchment. And so that collaboration can be worked out. And like I said, it takes that sound political will. But what we see currently happening is like one arm of government is like it's pushing the levers, and it's like the executive is pushing the levers, the legislature is being dragged kicking and screaming, the judiciary is being dragged. It may not necessarily work, because if you recollect, when the first wave of legislative corruption broke out was shortly after the National Assembly was inaugurated.
That's right.
Under Obasanjo. Some part of it, I dare say, was also blackmail. Because as at that time, the first thing we had, it was under Okadibo, we had that legislators had collected jumbo amounts of money as furniture and fiscal commission. That furniture allowance was also collected by the executive. Obasanjo had collected his own. It was also collected by the judiciary. They collected their own, but the Nigerians were only told that it was the legislature that collected, and everybody got angry. And you know that the hallmark of a democracy is the legislature. Under military rule, the executive will be there, the judiciary will be there, although they may be blowing muted trumpets, and then the executive combines the legislative role. So I think as we are criticizing the legislature, we should also be thinking of how to make them stronger. And you know, all this recruitment process we are talking about, so that they can begin to perform their proper roles. You recollect that it was the legislature that started the probe that led to the exposure of the oil scam, and for which certain people are being prosecuted even though they've not finished prosecuting them. So it's not all bad for them. Let's also acknowledge a few good things they have done and see how we can build that interagency collaboration. And part of what causes the crisis every time is that the executive usually wants to dictate who should be the leader of the legislature. If you recollect, that was the same problem between Obasanjo, Kadibo, and the team. Right. Let the executive hands off dictating who should be the leader of the legislature. Allow the legislators to elect their leader. That is also part of the current crisis of this very administration. Give them a free hand. Let them elect their leader, and anybody who emerges, collaboration or whatever. So I think that should be the beginning of the process.
All right, thank you very much, Uzenyekwe. Let's get the views of Professor.
Well, I think that obviously there is need for a cooperative government. If there is no cooperative, I mean, separation of powers does not imply rigid compartmentalization. The government has to cooperate. Oftentimes, there are behind-the-scenes consultations. That happens a lot in government. But the public also needs to be guided to know that these arms are talking to each other and not fighting.
But then we haven't seen that. It seemed that...
No. Behind-the-scenes consultations. They don't have to be on the pages of newspaper. It always happens. But what I'm saying is that the public needs to be also motivated to know that these sort of consultations, so that once in a while there's some kind of public posture about it, in order to encourage the public that we're not, the arms of government are not always who are committed within that system. There are people who are highly competent within that system. The problem, of course, is that I find that they submit to the culture of silence. If, for example, somebody emerges from within and decides to challenge the status quo, then they all decide to isolate the person. I mean, I can't understand it. And there are many who are sympathetic to that position or that view. It's a culture of hear no evil, see no evil. And it's not the first time. Anybody who challenges wrongdoing within the house
three institutions of government. Now, in doing this, what are the likely hazards that we face? Are we likely to see a diminution of checks and balances and a return to the lapdog rather than the watchdog syndrome?
Yes, quite interestingly, the legislature has a side function to check the excesses of the executive, and in a sense, to ensure checks and balances in the running of government. But that's not what we see. There is direct interference by the executive in the functions of governance. In the end, when we have a very strong state, we can talk about good governance. We can talk about accountability. We can talk about responsibility. We can talk about transparency. We can talk about integrity in governance. But until then, it will be difficult.
Professor Benson Osadolo, we sincerely appreciate your thoughts and your time this morning. Professor Benson Osadolo joined us from our Benin Network Center. He is a professor of history and international relations of the University Director Center for Social Justice. Thank you for coming on Good Morning Nigeria.
My pleasure.
And also finally, Professor Bolaji Owasaoye. He is the Executive Secretary, Presidential Advisory Committee Against Corruption. Thank you very much for coming on the program.
Thank you for inviting me.
All right, that's...
Rhoda, we're not done yet.
The legislature, I think change should begin with them.
Ortega, legislators should realize the importance of separation of powers and make they do the needful. Otherwise, the whole process will be in their self-interest.
And Said says to fight the phenomenon disease, corruption, the masses has to contribute their quota, not only the legislatives and the president.